Hi, I'm Chris Johnston, co-author of The Arrival of the Electric Car, and this is a synopsis of our book. So why, after all of these years, are we finally seeing an electric vehicle revolution? For those of you in marketing, you know the importance of overcoming objections. Objections are reasons why a prospective buyer will not buy your product. For electric vehicles, I believe there are three: price, range, and design. The major cost driver for electric vehicles is batteries. In 2010, the cost of lithium-ion batteries per kilowatt hour was $1,000. By 2019, that cost had fallen to $156 per kilowatt hour, and it continues to fall. A cost of $100 per kilowatt hour is widely agreed to be the point where electric vehicles will be at parity with their gas-powered counterparts, and we believe that will happen this year. Another cost driver is production economy of scale. Nissan made inroads with its Leaf, but Tesla proved that EV quantities could be reached by shipping over 50,000 Tesla Model 3s in the fourth quarter of 2019. Another way to look at price is the luxury mid-size car category. There are 26 vehicles in this category, and electric vehicles are at or below their gas-powered counterparts. We expect to see electric vehicles in the economy segment introduced later this year. In 2010, Nissan launched the Leaf, which I believe was the first mass-market electric vehicle. When introduced, it had a range of 73 miles. It now has a range of 226 miles. But more importantly, the average range of 22 of the mass-market electric vehicles shipping in North America in 2021 is 284 miles. The reality is that range is rapidly becoming a non-issue. Electric vehicles made a slight comeback in the early to mid 1970s as a result of the oil embargo. Unfortunately, these vehicles were rushed to market and design was an afterthought. This created a stigma that took decades to overcome. Tesla recognized that electric vehicles had to be better in every way: better performance, better safety, better range, and better looks. With their Model S, they created a paradigm shift, and the rest of the industry followed. A proof point is that the Tesla Model S won the Motor Trend Car of the Year. Not only did it win it, but Motor Trend named the Model S sedan the best of all cars that have won the award in the last 70 years. This is truly amazing when you consider how political the automotive industry is and the subjectivity regarding who wins what. I do believe that when we look back 10, 15, or 20 years from now, we will see this as a turning point. In addition to a variety of new vehicles, we are seeing much greater demand for electric vehicles. For example, the Tesla Model 3 was the best-selling luxury vehicle in the United States in 2019. Other cars in this category include the BMW 3 Series, the Audi A3, and the Volvo 90 Series. Even more telling is that during the first quarter of 2020, the Tesla Model 3 became the #1 selling car in California, displacing the much cheaper Honda Civic. We wanted to include a chapter about the history of electric vehicles because it's so interesting. It all started with Michael Faraday, who built the world's first electric motor in 1821. This resulted from his prior discovery that a magnetic field can generate an electric current. Either Robert Anderson from Scotland or American Thomas Davenport invented the first electric car around 1835. And 40 years passed from the creation of the first electric car to the first gasoline-powered car. The first 6 recorded land speed records were all held by electric vehicles. As a matter of fact, an EV was the first vehicle of any kind to drive faster than 100 kilometers an hour. That's about 62 miles an hour. That's the vehicle shown on the left. One of the first successful EV manufacturers was Baker Electric. Their first model was the two-seater Imperial Runabout, shown on the right. Thomas Edison bought one of these as his very first car. In 1909, Emil Gunfeld, an engineer with Baker Motor Vehicle Company, drove his Baker Electric Roadster 160 miles on a single charge. This would have been impressive in 2009, let alone 1909. The 1912 Baker Electric Victoria was used by 5 first ladies of the United States. Back then, women liked electric vehicles because they were quiet, clean, and much more reliable than their gas-powered counterparts. Does that sound at all familiar? You can argue that electric vehicles are better than gas-powered vehicles in every way. They are quiet, which creates an enjoyable experience. You can hear music much better, and it's easier to converse with people in the cabin. They have instant acceleration, which not only makes them fast, but also makes them enjoyable to drive because they do not have that mechanical lag. Their motors generate 100% of their torque or twisting force as soon as they start spinning, as opposed to internal combustion engines that need time to spin up. Because their motors are capable of spinning much faster and don't need to stay within a certain RPM range to maintain maximum power output, electric vehicles do not need a transmission. I like to joke that most EVs can go 140 miles an hour in first gear. We hear a lot about how EVs are green, but here's a truly amazing fact. In addition to the gasoline that they burn, internal combustion engine vehicles use about the same amount of electricity as EVs do. That's because producing gasoline or diesel fuel is an energy intensive process. It takes about 5 kilowatt hours of electricity to drill for, extract, transport, and refine a gallon of gas. Pump jacks, shown in the picture, are a popular way of extracting oil from the ground. They're scattered all over the planet. The vast majority are driven by large electric motors, which require a lot of electricity. In North America, over 60% of oil is transported by pipelines that require pumps driven by large electric motors. And of course, refineries consume a lot of electricity. So, whenever you burn a gallon of gasoline, you're also consuming the electricity that was used to produce that fuel. That's pretty crazy. EVs are much cheaper to own and operate. Sometimes I feel like I'm cheating by owning an electric vehicle. An internal combustion engine vehicle will cost about 4.5 times more to operate and maintain than a comparable electric car. You will save about $5,000 over 5 years. It costs a little over $3 to drive a typical EV 100 miles. And because of regenerative braking, EV owners are consistently getting over 150,000 miles on their brakes. When it comes to reliability, EVs are much less complex. There are about 2,000 moving parts in an internal combustion engine and transmission versus about 20 moving parts in the typical electric vehicle. And every moving part is a potential point of failure. Electric vehicles are also safer. The United States National Highway Traffic Study tests car models to assess how safe they are. In their 49-year history of testing cars, the Tesla Model 3 is the safest, meaning it has the lowest probability of injury in a crash. The fact is that most EVs are inherently safer for a couple of reasons. First, due to their typical battery placement, electric vehicles tend to have lower centers of gravity than gas-powered cars. Having a lower center of gravity makes an EV less likely to roll over. This is important because, according to the US Department of Transportation, rollovers have a higher fatality rate than other kinds of crashes. And secondly, an EV motor is much smaller and lighter than a gas or diesel engine. This small size enables EV manufacturers to increase what's called the crumple zone, an area in the front of the car that can absorb the energy of impact instead of the passenger compartment. Why do we hear so many myths about electric vehicles? It's partly due to misinformation campaigns. For example, according to the Washington Post, one fossil fuel interest group has committed to spending up to $10 million a year to spread misinformation about electric vehicles and bolster a positive public image of fossil fuel usage. There are a lot of myths floating around, and I picked a few of my favorites. The first falls into the category of the more audacious a mistruth, the more likely it is to stick. The first myth is that EVs are not greener than gasoline or diesel powered cars. Yes, in some cases, fossil fuels are burned to generate the electricity used to charge electric cars. But this highlights two of electric vehicles' many advantages. They are much more efficient than gas-powered vehicles, and the electric grid is getting greener. EVs will continue to get greener as the power grid gets greener. Internal combustion engine vehicles will remain dirty. Wind, solar, and hydro sources are expected to supply almost 50% of total US electricity supply by 2030, up from a little over 20% today. According to the US Department of Energy, electric vehicles are 2 to 3 times more efficient than gas-powered vehicles. So, even if electric cars are recharged with electricity generated by fossil fuel-based sources, their motors are much more efficient at transferring the energy stored in their batteries into motion. That means much less waste and a much better deal for the environment. Another myth is that there are not enough public charging stations. Well, first, most EV owners charge their vehicles at home, so you cannot compare that with the number of gas stations. It's simply not an apples to apples comparison. The United States has more than 90,000 public connections. 2 years ago, there were about 61,000 public connections. It grew 50% in just 2 years. And another myth is that electric vehicle batteries do not last and will cause a recycling problem. Well, we have data from over 10 years and millions of miles driven. Modern electric vehicle batteries lose about 1% of their capacity every 19,000 miles. So if your car were to last 300,000 miles, which is unlikely, its battery would still have 80% of its capacity. Many used electric vehicle batteries will have a post-vehicle life utilized for power grid storage. After that, we expect them to have a high recycling rate. We believe this because the existing lead acid batteries have a recycling rate of 99.3%. That's one of the highest recycled consumer products. The materials in lithium-ion batteries are more expensive, which means they'll have a higher likelihood of being recycled. Government mandates are accelerating EV adoption, driven by some of the world's largest populations with the dirtiest air. For example, India is going to require all two-wheeled motorized vehicles to be electric by 2026. China is considering a goal of having 60% of all automobiles sold in the country to be electric. This has global implications because the Chinese market is so large that most major automakers will have to conform to these regulations. Over 30 countries, including the UK, plus California, plan to ban petrol and diesel cars in 2035. The commercial segment also has an optimistic outlook because EVs have a very compelling ROI for certain use cases. In September of 2019, Amazon announced that it had ordered 100,000 fully electric delivery vans from Rivian Automotive, effectively doubling the number of commercial electric delivery vans on the planet. In the freight segment, Daimler Trucks North America, Volvo Trucks, and Tesla are all developing electric semi trucks. These have a compelling return on investment, even with only a 500-mile range. A proof point is that private fleets, the discerning smart money customers like PepsiCo and Walmart, are placing orders. So I hope you've enjoyed this synopsis and keep an eye out for EV developments. We are definitely witnessing history.